Mike Abbott, City Manager.
Bill Faulty, Municipal Attorney.
Forrest Dunbar.
John Weddleton.
Pete Peterson.
Patrick Flynn.
Bill Evans.
Elvin Ray Jackson. And those in the audience, please.
Claire Borisma.
You, sir.
Ken Harry.
Daryl Hess.
Thank you. Mr. Faulty, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have something of a late arrival to this Title 15 ordinance. To review the bidding, the Assembly may recall that it contracted with Dennis Wheeler to provide a redraft of what is currently Chapter 10 in Title 15, a very old section of the municipal code that includes housing standards. And Cooney Hall, I think, had really spearheaded that effort. When it was first introduced as AO 2016-38, there were a couple of provisions that some folks had requested some tweaks to, but the big issue was that there was no mechanism under Dennis Wheeler's contract that was limited to making amendments to Title 15 and the existing title of the ordinance to get to the associated fine fee schedule. So we made an offer to the Assembly that we could take back the draft of 2016-38 and add the additional Title 14 fees and fines provisions, and it would be reintroduced as a new ordinance with a new title. So we are just now printing off copies that are hot off the presses of an unnumbered document, which I think the Assembly members all have in front of them, or should be coming for the audience shortly. The subject matter experts here are truly Chris Schutte and Daryl Hess, and I'm going to try my best to defer to them where I can, but I will give you the high-level introduction to the new ordinance as proposed and where it differs from the previously proposed ordinance. In general, the new version includes an expanded title. It includes amendments to Title 14, which currently has one, I believe it's a $75 or a $50 fee for any violation of any part of Title 15, and it replaces it with a much more tailored provision on Jack Frost recommendation. It notes that the legislative formatting that we're using in this ordinance is a little unusual because so much of the current code is being retained but reordered. We didn't try to show exactly where all the deletions and the additions were because it would have gotten really out of hand really quickly. So what we did was we showed additions and deletions from the current code, but we didn't indicate where things had moved, although that's still visible to the Assembly and hopefully to the public, partly because we're going to attach the current code to this ordinance, but also because the current code has this very unusual numbering convention where everything is labeled 3.01, 3.02, 3.03, and we see where those are being re-slotted in. We had a request, or some interest had been expressed in including a anti-retaliation provision that would give occupants and or tenants some way to actually make these promises real, and so we have included that as a new section 230 all the way towards the very back of the packet, and we've done some general cleanup. If the Assembly would like, I could try to walk through, I have a marked up version of the original and turned into this one. I could try to highlight piece by piece where things have changed, and I'm not 100% confident I'll be able to get all of them, but at least I'll be able to get the majority, and then I'll defer to the actual subject matter experts that we have a marked up.
Yeah, I have a copy. So we can follow around volume.
Okay.
Mr. Faulty.
And highlight the statements.
Excuse me, gentlemen, Mr. Faulty. Okay, you would like that? And I also noticed something based on what Mr. Trainer said to me. There's a whole new title. So this is going to have to be
Yes, and
okay.
2 weeks later.
we had understood that that was the understanding because we had said at the last work session that there was no way to get to the Title 14 finding fees with the current vehicle.
Thank you, Mr. Trainer.
Just I want the body to understand this when you look at this, it's not the same document. So on the 21st, we'll introduce this, we'll take action 2 weeks later. And this issue will not be in front of us on the 21st.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Trainer.
along those lines, I should say that the current draft that's being distributed now says it's being submitted by the chair and the vice chair, although I don't know that you formally endorse this document yet, so take that with a grain of salt to see who actually does want to introduce it.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar.
Can I just ask a process question? So the prior version, this is not an S version, this is a different bill, essentially, different ordinance. What happened to the previous ordinance? Was it already introduced?
Well, yes, it will postpone it indefinitely, and we'll
Okay.
introduce this on Tuesday.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Falls.
All right, so distinguishing the prior version from the new version, you see there are several new whereas clauses explaining our legislative formatting choices. And then the amendments the substantive changes don't move in for some time. So I'll just highlight them, not going line by line, because I think that's gonna be basically impossible, but by subject area. There is a significant change to who bears the responsibility for extermination of insects or rodents. The prior draft would say that an occupant of a single dwelling unit is responsible unless it is spread across the whole building, in which case the owner bears responsibility. The new version would say the owner is responsible for extermination of insects or rodents, but that requirement of law doesn't prevent the landlord and a tenant from shifting responsibilities if they do that in the lease. But the person that is obligated to keep the building free of insects and rodents is the owner of the person.
Mr. Flynn?
Yeah, just for those who actually remember my comments about this when it came up for a public hearing last time, this is what the DEC recommends. The issue that I've run across in some areas of my district is somebody moves into an apartment and unwittingly brings, for example, bed bugs with them. They didn't know they had them, and then they find them. Well, if they report them before anybody else, before they migrate to another unit, then they're responsible. So their incentive, the way it was written, is to not report it until it does invade another unit, and then you have a bigger problem to deal with. And so this is, I think, a better way to do it. And if the owner can trace the cause, or then they can pursue remedy that way, withhold a deposit.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Please continue, Mr. Folsey.
Again, some of these are going to be nits. There's a previous standard that required certain surfaces to be easily cleanable. That was changed to non-absorbent. There was a requirement that each dwelling unit have facilities for the safe storage of drugs and household poisons. That's now been amended to say, and the resident will be responsible for child safety or other security locks if they are actually needed. Section 151090 is a current provision that has various prescriptive minimum standards for light and ventilation, referring to different amounts of light lumens that you receive in different parts of the dwelling, and the amount of air exchanges that need to occur. Most of that is completely obliterated in the new version, and it just now reads that the dwelling shall have the natural light and ventilation requirements required by the building codes, which are over in Title 23. That was tension between the two sections of code. Now we're just deferring to Title 23.
Mr. Dunbar?
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt your flow there, Bill. Just before we get too far afield, I want to touch on the bed bugs thing for one more moment. I apologize, I haven't been able to find which page it's on in this in the document, but if I heard what you said correctly, now in the first instance the owner is responsible for it, but they can contract and we can put a provision in the lease to shift responsibility onto the resident. Is that what you said?
No.
Right, so
Because it seemed like that would just become a standard item in every lease.
you're right, that is actually not in the draft. It is on page 13 at the bottom. It's a new responsibility of owner section. It is I. Now reads, every owner of a dwelling shall be responsible for extermination of insects and rodents on the premises, full stop. It does include provision, it says notwithstanding this subsection, nothing should prevent the owner from recovering from an occupant of a dwelling the unit house extermination for any infestation whose cause can be attributed to the occupant or the occupant's failure to report an infestation. Okay. I'll refer to the subject matter experts on how that will play out.
Thank you.
There are slight changes to the space heater requirements in section 110. There's now a distinction between space heaters with combustion fuels that are not vented to the outdoors and those that do.
This is yeah, through the chair, this is a recognition that we do not want to allow or encourage people to use combustion-based space heaters that are not properly vented to the outdoors in their spaces, but that there are certain types of combustion-based heating systems that, when installed properly and vented to the outside and provided with enough oxygen flow for combustion, are acceptable. That's like a Toyo stove and things like that.
section 160, which empowers the duties of the appropriate authority, we now insert provisions that would give occupants 24-hour notice prior to entry of the inspection authority, and have removed a clause in the original draft which had caused some consternation, which would have provided that all information regarding the complainant be kept, all identifying information regarding the complainant be kept confidential. It was already covered under the Public Records Act in a way that most people found correct under the status quo, and this would have caused some tension between the Public Records Act and Title 15, so now we're deferring that issue entirely to the existing Public Records Act provisions. And now switching to my other document, then the other new substantive provision is this final section 230 on page 33, which would prohibit retaliatory actions based on someone bringing a complaint of a violation of this chapter to the appropriate authorities, and offer them the ability to bring an action to enjoin violations or to have a defense and an action where they're being evicted, that they're being evicted in retaliation for their complaining that they were entitled to something under Title 15 to which they've not been provided. There are a few other small changes throughout the ordinance, but I think that is the highlights. Are there any others, Chris and Daryl, that you would like to?
Just that the following section after that, to the chair, section 7 deals with the updates to the fines and fees.
And that's right, that fine schedule was a significant change. Currently, just about all of the text you'll find in the first 33 pages of this ordinance are already in the code as one code section, section 15.10.20. And the penalty or fine for violating that is $75. This ordinance would break that section 15.10.20 into several sections, and then the new fine schedule would tailor the penalties and fines to particular violations of the code. And they are substantially higher fines and fees, which are the recommendation of the subject matter experts. We looked at this and we noted that the fines and fees, to our understanding, have not been updated for decades. 40 years.
Yep.
That's what I wanted to bring out. The reason for updating this is because the old fine of $75 was a fine from 40 years ago. And what do you know that hasn't changed in 40 years? Maybe large states beyond that.
National anthem.
Mr. Wolsey, do you continue?
I think that's my introductory remarks. I'm happy to defer to either Mr. Judy or Mr. Ness if they have anything else to add.
Page 3, starts on page 34.
To the chair, real quick, I have to apologize again. I don't know how the calendar works this way, but the subject matter expert on the regulation side or on the code enforcement side, Mr. Frost, had a pre-planned vacation this week, so he couldn't be here to answer very specific questions. But he and his team, as Mr. Falsey said, they really spent a lot of time looking at this and providing valuable input, both on the fines and fees, but also on some of the substantive changes in the earlier draft.
Thank you, Mr. Judy. Mr. Hess and then Mr. Train.
Thank you, through the chair. Most of these tweaks were based on comments we received from Mr. Perry, Cook Inlet Housing, Whiteman Properties, and a couple of other individuals. Some of them were little tweaks. We really appreciated the input. Cook Inlet Housing pointed out when we talked about overflow in bathtubs that there's new technology that we didn't take into consideration. So some of the tweaks are very minor, including new technology like Toyo stoves or overflow backflow valves for bathtubs. But I know that originally Alaska Legal Services had recommended that the property owners be responsible for all infestations. And one of the things we heard from a lot of people, the comments was, well, tenants don't report an infestation and it spreads to the entire building and it's a significant cost to the landlord. So this actually, I think, addresses that concern. And when we looked at the Landlord-Tenant Act, really the Landlord-Tenant Act holds the property owner responsible to have a safe and clean property. So this is in keeping with other sections of the land use code, for example. If you're a tenant and you violate the land use code, it's the property owner who is cited. It is not the tenant. The tenant usually
this started, not from the Assembly members, but for people walking the Lisbon's offices, that what can we do? We've got a problem with bed bugs, and there was no resolution. When we looked at this ordinance, it hadn't been addressed in 40 years. And that's the reason you saw the fine of $75, something that was sticking to the page they age. But we really need, we owe Mr. Hess gratitude for this. And I understand that we've now got Wilder, and we've got Cook Inlet, we've got pest control. Thank you very much for being part of this. So this is how we do an ordinance. What's gonna happen is on the 21st, we would postpone indefinitely, 2016-38, and we'll introduce a new version. That will be set for a public hearing on the 12th of July. So that's the time we have to work on this one. But I appreciate the process. This is how it should work. So thank you, Harold.
Thank you, Mr. Train. Mr. Evans?
I was just curious whether Chris Severo or anybody is aware of whether any particular provisions in either the original or the new version have been highlighted as particularly troublesome to either landlord groups or tenant groups, places where you maybe have seen pushback with what we're doing. I haven't heard that much, so it's
Yeah, through the chair, the initial comments from the list of parties really were nitpicky in some regards. There also were a lot of really good suggestions that made it to the final draft related to clarifying and tightening some of the language related to pest control, thank you, and other measures. So there hasn't been, to our knowledge, very many comments, and those that we did receive were very targeted in nature.
Thank you, Mr. Street. Mr. Evans? Mr. Steele?
Yeah, I've had a number of calls, mostly from one person, but about smoke or marijuana smoke coming through the walls, or just coming into their apartment. What are the liabilities on that?
Mr. Hess?
It's okay, batteries.
Well, Joe raised his hand, so that'll be different. I don't think this ordinance addresses it, and I don't think anything could.
Through the chair, I'm a renter, and a year ago I had to start putting towels around my front door because the drug dealer moved in across the hall and the marijuana was driving me crazy. But really, it's up to, it's really a civil matter. The municipality could try the assembly to pass an ordinance making all privately owned rental units non-smoking, but I think there would be a court challenge to that. It's really a civil matter between the landlord and the tenant.
Do you have a right to have your, do you have a right to have your unit smoke free?
If the landlord makes the building smoke free.
Must he do so if you are being impacted?
That's the civil matter. No, there's no legal obligation.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm wondering, how are we going to distribute the information to landlords? Because I imagine there's a fairly significant number who live out of state.
Mr. Hess, are you able to address that question? Thank you. Mr. Trainee?
The clerk's office should put access to it on the city website, so you can download this document. And you'll take care of that, Lisa? Just have a hot link so they can download it. Until we do it on most legislation, we have it posted on the website, they can download it.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Hess?
Through the chair, if, once we get a final version passed, we could post it on the, obviously on muni.org, but it also, we might consider having a little informational card printed up that would direct landlords to the new ordinance, and we could distribute it through different property management companies, and code enforcement can actually distribute those as they interact with landlords, property owners, and tenants.
Thank you, Mr.
Building
Hess.
safety.
Any other comments? Okay, I just want to go over again what Mr. Trainee just said a few minutes ago about the process on Tuesday. Because AO 2016-38 is on our agenda for public hearing, what will happen is I'll open it up for public hearing, but I'll let folks know ahead of time that we have a new document. I'll open it up for public hearing, I'll close the public hearing, Mr. Trainer will move to postpone indefinitely, this will go away. The new ordinance will be on, is the addendum already done, Lisa?
I just
It
saw
just
it come
came
through
in.
the email.
Okay, so the new ordinance will be on the laid on the table items, and then we'll take 3 to introduce it, and we'll set the public hearing